Hey there! I've got a brand new book on J.A. Henckels knives to show you. This book was written by Neil Punchard, who, along with Ricky Ray, co-authored the very excellent Boker book, which I recently reviewed on the channel. As a matter of fact, Mr. Punchard saw that video and sent me this copy to say thank you for that review. He even went as far as autographing it for me. So, first of all, thank you, Neil. That was very kind of you. And second, even though you didn't ask, of course I'll be sharing it with my viewers. By the way, Neil Punchard has written several books on knives, in addition to the Boker book, including co-authoring Switchblades of Italy, The Art of the Switchblade, and the Latama Legend. And that's a book about Italian automatic stilettos. He also wrote Daisy air rifles and BB guns, 100 Years of America's Favorite. That looks really cool. What baby boomer wouldn't like that book? So he's no stranger to researching and writing about knives and knife makers. And I noticed for this book, he even did the photography. And as you'll see, it's full of beautiful professional pictures. So if you've seen the Boker book, then I can say this book on Henckels is similar in its professional presentation and its thorough research. And it really showcases a very impressive lineup of rare and uncommon Henckels knives, all in a beautiful state of condition. Now, big disclaimer, before receiving this book, I knew next to nothing about Henckels knives. So I'm certainly no expert on them and probably not the best person to review the book, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. I'll tell you this, it answered my questions I had about Henckels. It gave me a lot of great information that I didn't even know to ask about. And it's really given me some concrete, actionable ideas that I think will help my collection. The book is 8.5 by 11 inches. It is a softcover book. Here's a picture of the back cover. It has a couple of illustrations of the Henckels factory, both in 1854 and 1880. And you can just get a feel for how big of a company this was way back then. But it's 119 pages. They are all glossy pages, and I do believe that every single page has an illustration on it, usually a color photograph. With the exception of the first page of every chapter, and here they've done something very smart, I think. Those pages are black, so it makes it really easy to find the beginning of a chapter. You can almost see the chapters, just by looking at the side of the book. We'll start with the table of contents, give you an idea of what is in the book. First, of course, there's an introduction. Chapter 1 is the Hinkle story. Chapter 2, traditional folding knives. Chapter 3, sportsman's knives. Chapter 4, switchblade knives. Chapter 5, miscellaneous knives. Chapter 6, fixed blade knives. There's 3 very short chapters at the end. One on the Henckels worldwide awards, the awards they've won around the world over the years. A little information on dating a Henckels knife. And then finally, a timeline of important dates in Henckels history. Let's start with that last chapter, Henckels timeline, first, because there's a couple of things I want to say there. And the first would be, I cannot imagine the amount of time it took to research all this and sort it all out and put it on 3 concise pages that makes it so easy for the rest of us to read about and understand all the key events in this company's long, long history. And when I say long, I mean long. This company was actually founded in 1731. They registered their trademark, these twins, or Zwilling, the same year, June 13th, 1731. It makes it one of the world's oldest trademarks, right up there with, say, Stella Artois beer or something. So, like I said before, I didn't really know much about Henckels. I knew that they were an old line German knife company. I had no idea how old. And my experience with them would be, I would see, in looking at Swiss Army knives, I would see these little red six-bladed utility knives from Henckels that looked just like Victorinox knives, and I couldn't figure it out. Well, now I know because of this book that those were actually contracted out to Victorinox, and I'll talk about that later. But they've been selling knives in the United States since 1883, when they opened a showroom in New York and got Graf and Schmidt to be their distributor here in the U.S. A couple other dates I want to point out. And one is 1975, because since that year, Henckels hasn't made their own pocket knives. That was the last year that they made their own pocket knives, and after that, they would have them contracted out to other companies on and off, predominantly Boker, and but also, as I said, the Swiss Army knife style knives at one time with Victorinox. So I think this is a great book and a great company to study and some great knives to have for many of my audience or my viewers, because it really intersects with the knives that I show predominantly on this channel, Victorinox knives, Boker knives. And then in 2005, Henckels stopped selling folding and fixed blade knives under their name, no matter who made them, altogether. And I think that's another reason I really have never looked into Henckels more closely up until this time, is that, I would go to look at Henckels knives, all I ever got were kitchen knives, because that's what they do now, and they do it very successfully. Here's chapter 1, and I'm not going to go through each and every one of these chapters, or certainly not through each page, because I want to encourage you, if you're interested, to go get your own copy of this book. But this is the Henckels story, and the authors told me, he said, that it was really more straightforward than figuring out Boker's history, but there wasn't as much raw material or resources to pull from, so that was a challenge in its own right. But I think he's done a great job in breaking this up into sections where we can understand it, and it would be very confusing because, for one thing, it was a family-run company. The founder, his sons, his grandsons, and they were all named Johann something Henckels. Every single one of them, so it would be really confusing to try to figure this out on your own. But here he's broken it into the early years, 1731 to 1913, the World War years, 1914 to 1945. By the way, much like Boker, Henckels trademarks were appropriated, seized by the U.S. during the World Wars, and they had to get those back after the wars. Post-war years, 1946 up through 1976, and then he's calling the mid-70s to 2006 the contract years, where they quit making their own pocket knives and had other companies make them for them. Chapter 2 is on traditional knives. This is a great chapter just for eye candy, and it's a kind of a meaty part of the book. Yeah, let me just flip through this real quick so you can get a feel for the outstanding knives that are in here and the quality photographs of them. Of course, as I flip this way, you're getting into the older knives. Beautiful carved mother of pearl. Here's what I would call an exhibition knife. It's got probably every tool they were capable of putting on a pocket knife on that knife at that time in mother of pearl. They actually did win first place in the Crystal Palace, the World Exposition, the Crystal Palace Exposition. I can't remember exactly what year that was, 1850 something. Again, there's a list of all the awards Henckels has won through the years in the back of the book. Real tortoiseshell handled knives, just some fantastic stuff in here. This is also chapter 2, but he's given it this black page again because it separates the Henckels made knives from the knives that were made on contract after 1975. Again, predominantly by Boker, but then some other companies as well. And you can really see the similarities here with Boker knives. And it's interesting to note that while Henckels made certain traditional American patterns, like I believe they made a Stockman knife and a Congress knife and a whittler. They never made a canoe, they never made a trapper, and they never made a Barlow. So if you see a canoe, a Barlow, or a trapper that says Henckels on it, it's a Boker knife for sure. And if you collect Bokers, you might want to see about picking one of those up. And at one point in time, Smoky Mountain Knife Works and Blue Ridge Cutlery had Boker make Hinkles knives exclusively for them or on contract with them, and those can be identified by this red Zwillings badge in the handles. And there's a canoe and a Barlow from that same time period. A copperhead with imitation tortoise shell. So, great chapter on sportsman's knives. You know, I really like sportsman's knives because it encompasses, you know, camper knives and utility knives, Swiss Army style knives. But there's just some really classic stuff in here. One other thing I want to point out is that these Swiss Army style knives at one time were made in Brazil. Now, I don't know who made those, but they were contracted out to a company in Brazil, and they can be identified by a faux wood handle and a trademark of just one stick figure holding a staff instead of the twins. Here's some catalog cuts of their Swiss Army style knives that were actually made by Victorinox. I don't know if they had any tool combinations or models there that were exclusive to them. Perhaps I'd have to take a closer look at that. There's just some great old hunting knives in here with shotgun shell pullers, you know, locking blades, fantastic stuff, gutting tools. Here are some six-bladed utility knives that Henckels made. It's interesting to note they never did make a humpback camper version like the Pattern 182 from Boker. But I was able to acquire recently this model knife here, actually more specifically like this one shown from a 1956 catalog, because the one I acquired has a bail. And I'll be featuring that on the channel in the next video or two, so stay tuned for that. Okay, I better move along here a little bit. There's a great chapter on switchblade knives. I'm not a switchblade knife collector, but this book appears to be full of a lot of really valuable high-priced switchblade knives. And one thing I wanted to show is just the size of their factory and offices, I guess, during this time period. I'm not exactly sure what time period that is, but I just thought it was so cool that all the way up the corner of the building there, they have these frescoes of the Zwilling, the twins, their logo. Switchblade knives. There's a miscellaneous knives. Again, some more Swiss Army knife style knives and some picnic sets. Some that fold and some that don't. They fit in leather pouches. You know, you learn all kinds of things when you go through a book like this, and just some things are kind of random. And one thing I learned is that a corn knife, I always just kind of assumed it had something to do with the plant. But corn knives were actually like little folding scalpels that people used to use to cut the corns, or what would they be, like bunions off of their feet. Because back in the day, as the author points out, shoes were ill-fitting and people regularly built up painful corns on their feet, and they would use these type of knives to shave off the I guess, calloused flesh. Ugh. I don't want to use one of those. Okay. Fixed blade knives, great chapter on fixed blade knives. And we're back to the end there with the Henckels Awards. You know, I also recently reviewed this book, A Collector's Guide to Vintage Winger Knives by my friend and fellow collector Dave Arnold. And after seeing the amount of time and effort and expense that he put into this book, I just think that we should support the authors of these knife books that support our hobby by buying their books. You know, they write for a small niche market in the first place. I mean, it can't be a money-making enterprise for them. It's got to be a labor of love. So, you know, we should just support their efforts and help them defer their costs, you know, by buying the books that we're interested in. And I'll just say personally that some of the most rewarding dollars I've spent in my knife collecting have been on books. And I thought about that. I thought that's kind of strange. Why is that? And I came up with 3 reasons. And the first one would be, the more I know about a knife and its maker and its background, the more interesting it becomes to me and the more I value it. So it kind of makes me love my knives more, if that makes sense. The second thing would be, I think these research books can really help you focus your collection and kind of focus your efforts in collecting. They help you make informed purchases and avoid costly mistakes and rip-offs. So it's the old adage, you know, buy the book before you buy the knife. And then finally, some of these books become collectible items themselves eventually. You cannot assume that these books on these specialized subjects are going to be in print forever. And, you know, knife books often go out of print. And when they do, they become very hard to find. And when you can find them, they often cost much more than their original cover price. So I'm not saying that, you know, you buy these books necessarily in anticipation of turning a profit. But personally, I've never sold a knife book yet that I haven't made money on. But buy them for the information and knowledge they impart. But my point would be, just don't wait around forever or they may get gone. For instance, try to find a copy of Levine's Guide to Knives and Their Values. This once came out pretty much regularly and was considered the Bible of knife collecting. Try to get a copy of it now. Try to find a copy of Ed Holbrook's Official Scout Blades. It's really only one of 2 reference books on official scout knives. Try to find a copy of Goins' Encyclopedia of Cutlery Markings. Red alert, this actually is still available, new old stock, on Knife Magazine's website. Get them while you can. But my point would be that if you're interested in a knife book, get it before it gets gone. Okay, J.A. Hinkle's Knives by Neil Punchard can be found at hinckelsbook.squarespace.com. I'll put the active link to that website in the description box below where you can go and purchase your own copy. I'll also put some other sites where you can go check out his other works. It's a great book, and I highly recommend it. Thanks for watching, and have fun collecting.